Okay, so we're live, and oh yeah, okay, getting a little glitches there. Brilliant. Okay, so hey everyone, I'm Claire. I'm lead designer at Jagex, and I'm based in Cambridge. Colin?
I'm Colin Michaels. I live in Florida, United States, and I'm an aspiring game developer. How's that?
Aspiring. Emmeline?
I'm Emmeline. I now work as course coordinator on the new Masters in Games Design and Development at the National Film and Television School, and I also have a few jobs on the side as well.
Okay, and Rich?
I'm Richard Fine. I'm the director of the Binary Refinery. I do tech contracting and project management stuff for games. I use Unity, and I live in Oxford.
Right, and Rob?
I'm Braun. I go to school at Braun University, and I'm studying game design.
Okay, brilliant. So we've got a fairly even spread. So general industry topics rather than specific technical areas or design areas. So starting off with an easy one, breaking into the industry. So Rich, you were saying that you thought it changed from when you did it.
Yeah, so it definitely, it used to be common knowledge, and I think it was true common knowledge at the time as well, that the ways to get in were QA, and then you could, after having worked in QA, you give the design team just enough ideas they finally remember who you are, and then the next game you get to design the whole thing after having tested the last or something, and that was the myth in any case. Or you knew someone who could get you in, kind of thing. I think that has started to change now, though. I mean, the first big change came from the uprising of the modding communities. It was finally, because the biggest problem, I guess, is that it wasn't very easy to demonstrate full project skill on your own. And I say that I say full project skill because, I mean, for a long time, obviously it was possible to make a small game completely yourself. It was possible to make tech demos, it was possible to make animation reels and so on. But integrating all these things together into an actual game, working with other people as well, these are skills people tend to overlook as important. And this is one of the reasons why I think fresh graduates often have trouble getting hired, is because there are not very many courses that actually, that teach things like source control, that teach things like, assigning tasks to different team members and so on, and dealing with that aspect of just cooperating with other people rather than being completely in control of it yourself. And so the mods gave people an opportunity that wasn't previously there to actually work with other people, often in distributed environments, which is even harder than face-to-face, to put something together that was much bigger than any one person could do. And so I did work with people who got their break into industry as people who made particularly popular maps for Counter-Strike, or who just worked on total conversions and things, and then were just picked up as designers, as artists, and so on in the industry to work on stuff all the time. I mean, and there have been some great success stories in this as well. And then that's kind of the big thing. But I think now increasingly as well, with the increase in dedicated games courses, it is now more feasible to go to school specifically to be a game programmer or a level designer, and then to go straight into a game programming or level design job. You don't have to go in through QA anymore. Well, this is my theory. Of course, I haven't applied for a job in the industry anytime recently.
You see, the thing is I took a really long, rocky road to break into the industry. My intention was to be in the games industry from a very, very young age, and I actually moved to the UK specifically for that purpose, with 2 degrees in my back pocket. But it took me 2 years of interviews, and I had a body of work to show. I had, I was trying to break in as a programmer. I had a body of work to show. I was showing it around. I was interviewing a lot of places, and I was working very hard to get into the industry. But it was finally through a friend of a friend that I got a job at a place I'd previously been interviewed at and not got through. And within a month of being at that company, I was actually put in charge of a product, and I became lead programmer. So I'm convinced it wasn't a skills gap. It was purely getting through the door. And then when I was at this Women in Games thing on Thursday, and I was speaking to a lot of people there, a lot of people there had got into the industry either through their partners or a friend, or they had gone through the traditional QA route. So I don't know if it has changed, because I know at Jagex a lot of our talent still comes from our player support and our QA talent pool.
Not always what you know, who you know.
Yeah, well,
Sometimes.
It's a concern, because I think some of the things that the games courses offer that's the most valuable, at least from what I've seen of students and everything, is games courses that have networking ties with studios. Means that these students basically get some more face time with people in studios, and basically that's how they get their foot in the door, that's how they meet these people. And I know that's certainly true at my previous studio. One of our friends got in, they got me in, then we got Tim in, and then Tim got Alison, and it was like within, and you speak to a lot of people, and a lot of years, a lot of graduate years, one student from a group of friends will get into a place, and that student will then pull their known associates in with them. So I don't know if the invention of the games courses has actually changed entering the industry.
And the thing
I know.
Sorry, Rob, go ahead.
Sorry. I know here in America it still very much is about who you know and who can get you in, because I had a friend who graduated in the spring, and she applied to a bunch of different places as a tech artist or a tech artist intern. And the only time that she got any bites was when someone that she had met from networking, who was actually an alum of our school, talked to someone that she knew at Sony Computer Entertainment America, and so got her an internship there as a tech artist. So, and I was actually talking to Lisa Braun. She contributes to AltDev, and she had flat out said that a lot of it boils down to, who you know, because like here in America anyway, everything is so locked down with NDAs, so that like when all these devs meet up, they can't talk about what they're working on. So, all they do is just talk about personal stuff. And so, it's a very close-knit network, and unless you're already in that network in some way, shape, or form, it can be difficult to get your foot in.
I guess the question that I'm then left with is just like, what's happening in these hiring departments? Like, what is the process that things are going through such that someone like yourself, Claire, can apply with 2 degrees and a bucket load of experience and a full portfolio of stuff, and they're not taking you on, but then you come back later, having been recommended by a friend. Why is it that makes so much difference? What's going through the minds of these people?
It's like a pre-screening process. Maybe they already have.
I mean,
that person is already known by somebody else.
A lot of it.
I think a lot of what it is people are more willing to hire someone who is like kind of like a mutual friend of a friend, because
Of course.
Think about it, where if you meet, someone new that you've never met, if they already know a friend of yours, you're more willing to accept them and listen to what they have to say than just some random person who starts coming up and talking to you.
Sure. So but I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, there's a position that needs to be filled, right? I mean, they need someone to do some work, and so if you're applying as a cold dropping your CV in, or if you're applying through a friend kind of thing, like they have a position that they need to fill, and they won't always be able to just wait for someone in the studio to know someone who'd be perfect for it.
Well, having hired, having interviewed people as a lead designer, I've never had to hire someone as a programmer. I've been part of the decision-making process, but I've never been the key person. But I have been the key person on an interview process for a design role, and I've also been involved in hiring artists. One of the first things, past the filter screen that you do, is you Google the individual, and then you try find out if anyone has anything to say about the individual. So one of the first steps is to dig into LinkedIn, find the studios they work at, find out if anyone at those studios has anything to say about them. Sometimes if no one remembers them, that says a lot in itself. So that's like a first step. However, if you're interviewing for a graduate, I think I'll share a story about interviewing for okay. The previous studio I was at, we were in trouble. We knew the studio was going a bad way, and the studio collapsed a few months later. But we were trying to desperately get some talent in, just to help us shore up the project. And because of a government-sponsored thing, we could get someone in, as long as they were a student, or a recent graduate, we could get them in, and the first 3 months, their salary would be paid. So it was like a freebie for us almost. And I got a stack of CVs to go through, and I managed to pick out about 6 or 7 people for interview. And they had to be students, so I was only going through student CVs. And I interviewed those 6 people. And of the 6 people I interviewed, I came to the determination that none of them would be worth the time to train. Because even though their salary was being paid, there would have been more of a distraction than a contribution. So it's experiences like that, I think, that make people very hesitant to hire fresh talent.
That's a very good point.
Mm.
Do you think that's the way that it should be? That it should be about who you know, or do you think it should be about what you know?
I think it should be about what you know. But I mean, we one thing we haven't talked about is the third route, which is just go make a game yourself, which is now a possibility, which wasn't a possibility 5 years ago. Go make an iOS game, or go make a social game. Yeah, I mean, one thing I will say is a lot of successful indies have come from studios. Notch had experience working at King, but it's a good starting point. And I mean, if you've already got someone said it to me in relation when I was trying to break in, and I considered doing a commercial game project as interview material, and someone said to me, well, if you do that and you start selling copies, newsflash, you're in the games industry. So
you got yourself in. You didn't know anybody yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to be hired by a studio. You effectively can hire yourself. So yeah.
I think Richard said it earlier too. It's good to know how to work along with people, because even if you're going to be independent, you have to have some kind of social skills and be able to work with others to get it marketed and get it out there. And,
I think that's where the knowing someone comes in to play too, because I mean, studios, their cultures are so wildly different. I mean, just pulling someone random off the street, you don't know how well they're going to fit in.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got a lot of the bigger studios like EA, where it's real serious down to business all the time. But like a lot of the indie AAA studios have kind of got, at least from the public looking in, they've got like a more light-hearted attitude that they take to it. So they're going to want someone that's going to fit into that culture.
I mean, I do know at Jagex, one of our primary hiring criteria is if the person has what we call Jagex DNA, which we define in a whole range of ways. But Mark's very, very big on hiring for attitude rather than hiring for skill, because it's that saying of you can always train someone, but you can't necessarily give them the right attitude.
So is this perhaps one of the causes of the problems here then, is that we don't really know how to assess someone's attitude, how to assess how they're going to fit into a culture quickly. You can't figure out enough about them in a 2-hour interview, or even taking them for drinks afterwards, to figure out whether they're going to be a good fit.
Blitz has an interesting interview process that I quite like. Blitz's interview process is they actually bring someone in for 2 days. Well, they've got a stage process, but the final stage of their interview process is they actually bring someone in for 2 days to work with the team. You have to sit down, and I won't say what you do because I don't know if they've changed it or not. But you have to sit down and you get given a task with a stripped down version of tech, and go through it. And through that, they try to use those 2 days to assess your attitude and your approach.
Is that their designer test, or is that the test for everybody?
That's their programmer test. I don't know what their designer test is. I have yet to find a good designer test. I quite like the Jagex designer test. It's a full day. Half of it is just interviewing and talking to you and stuff, but then the second half is we actually sit you in a room. I can say this because it's pretty open, but we sit you in a room with a bunch of materials at random, and we ask you to make a game and write down the instructions for the game. And then the rule is that we'll play the game after you've left. So if you haven't written down all the instructions, or if you haven't, so we'll actually bring in a few people and play the game that you've come up with in this short amount of time with some instructions. And that I thought was really quite good, because it was a nice broad range of skill tests. So I quite like that test that TDR actually managed to come up with. So yeah.
Do you get enough information about their thought process when designing the game that way? I mean, it strikes me, if I were going to do that kind of thing, I'd take them into another room and I'd have them watch the people play sort of behind one of those observation screens, and I'd talk to them about how they think the game is doing and what they think they've done wrong and what they think they've done right and so on.
That's an interesting addition. It would take extra time and effectively make it a 2-day process, which takes time away from some very valuable people, because interviewing is expensive. But also I'd worry that it would break them. Especially, there's nothing worse than having someone inexperienced see their work critiqued. I mean, it's most probably extremely valuable to the interview process, because if they break down in the critique phase, not to hire them. But the idea of having like a sobbing 20-year-old on my hands is possibly dissuading me from letting them see people rip their game to shreds, because people aren't going to hold back.
I was a teacher for a year, so you learn sort of how to be critical of people, but kind of make it a lot softer.
Oh no, I can give softer feedback, but I'm saying if you've got that situation of like the one-way mirror situation where they're seeing other people play the game, knowing most game people, they'll be pretty brutal.
I see my students take feedback. One of them said, gosh, they're tearing them apart, and I was like, no, that's quite mild.
Well, I mean, I think one of the most useful skills I picked up was from my drama background. We used to have this thing called notes, where the director, after a performance, whether it was a practice or a full night performance, would sit you down and give you notes on your performance, and they would be brutal. They would be breakdown in tears brutal. And that was a good experience.
I'm just wondering which would be worse, the watching the team of professional game developers playing your game, or developing the project and then reading the forums afterwards.
Yeah, that can be pretty brutal too.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so slight topic shift. First of all, a show of hands. How many people have actually put a product out? Whether it was a student product or put a product out onto the wider world. Okay, so reading. Oh, okay, Emmeline, say. Okay, right.
I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that. I'm not sure I've ever still been at a studio as the product's gone out the doors and drank those drinks.
Okay,
But I've worked on Viking Battle for Asgard and Heaven's Sword.
The suggested topic is dealing with strangers who've played your game. Obviously, dealing with community management is a separate role and a separate job. But as a dev, occasionally you'll be interviewed, but occasionally you will also just see the results and what people are saying about your product. Thoughts?
That's some important feedback, though, developer to talk to the actual people playing the games. So there's lots of things that you might miss. As if you have other developers do it, they might understand what the technology and what went behind doing it. But the game, to a simple person just playing the game to play the game, you're going to get a different outlook on it. So I think it's very important.
But I'm more meant dealing with the internet, as in the mob.
One of the advantages of having mostly worked on games that, by and large, haven't sold fantastically is I don't often run into people who've played my game.
Okay. Well, does anyone have a particularly bad experience they'd like to share about random stranger or who's commented on something you put love and work into?
Well, I suppose my first AltDevBlog Day article was about how we shouldn't use subversion anymore, and that's a bit of a religious issue for a lot of people. So I drew a lot of flames both on AltDevBlog Day and on Reddit and on Hacker News and probably in the whole of the parts of the internet I didn't even notice. So I mean, it's not shipping a game getting feedback like that, but still, is that relevant or?
What I would say about that is the guys who actually invented subversion, who now work at Google, I believe went on to do Mercurial, and there is actually a Google talk from, I think it's like last year's I.O. conference, where they actually apologize for subversion.
Really?
Yes. And they say, go use Mercurial, please, because we're really sorry.
Wow. Okay, well that's a nice bit of indication then. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of negative feedback, mostly from people who hadn't fully read it. And I think this is one of the key things. When you do ship a game, people are going to find things that they don't like about it. They are going to complain about stuff. They are going to blame you.
But I mean, there's a big difference between genuine feedback and hate trolling.
Yes, well, this is true, but it's difficult to tell looking at a negative comment whether it is genuine feedback or hate trolling. So I think the only approach you can take, there are two approaches. I think one of them is a bad idea. You can either just ignore all of it, and I think that's a bad idea. It's genuine feedback, okay? Or you can try and treat everything as if it's genuine feedback, evaluate it, and recognise that the players can be wrong, and that the players can say such a dynamic doesn't work, and you say, well, actually, I think it does. They can say, oh, this balancing is really out of whack. If I play with this character, everything's far too easy. And you'd be like, actually, no. Like, I remember going through balancing that character. I've thought about the scenario you're describing that you played here, where it was really easy, and you must have just got lucky, because most of the time it isn't that easy. The players are frequently wrong, and we shouldn't worry about the players saying things that are wrong any further than if we were supposed to not have them. Like, if we were supposed to communicate to them how things work, and they got the wrong end of the stick, then we failed at communicating. But we didn't fail at designing it that way.
Okay, harder proposal, and this has actually occurred, this has happened to me, where player feedback is 100% legitimate, and their suggestion is correct, and possibly would make a funner game, but is not in keeping with the tone of the product or a stylistic decision.
Okay. Even then, I mean, I guess, at that point, there was always some point in development where you had to choose between, am I going to just focus on making the gameplay more and more fun, or am I going to put resources into style and tone and balancing all of the aesthetic factors as well? I mean, not that gameplay isn't an aesthetic factor in and of itself. I mean, there's a gestalt to be looked after. And it may well be true that there were things that players point out could have been done differently that would make it more of this, but they would make it less of that. As you say, it might make the gameplay more fun, but it would make the tone less consistent. And yeah, at some point you had to make value judgments on how much you want to put into gameplay versus tone, and they can question that. They can say, well, we think you should have put more into gameplay, less into tone. And, well, you didn't.
Rob?
I think that's the kind of thing where it's worth acknowledging as like, yeah, if you ever do that kind of gameplay mechanic again, then that's the direction you can take it in even further if you want to. But when it comes to things like balancing gameplay versus tone and aesthetics, I don't think that there is a very clear right answer, and as such, there is no clear wrong answer.
Okay, but I mean more in dealing with the player's feedback, whether you ignore it, acknowledge it, how you handle it.
I would say taking a general consensus of it, maybe not one specific, but if the whole community of people are feeding back, like, this is totally wrong, then obviously you should take that consideration. And even though it may not seem right to you, but you have to take a different aspect and think about it, what they're just saying as a community.
Yeah. And I would say it depends more on the type of game too. Like something like an MMO or like an RTS with a really heavy online component like StarCraft, that's especially true. But I mean, if it's just a one-off game where you don't plan on doing a sequel or anything like that, just, okay, well, it is what it is, just file it in the back drawer for potential future use.
Yeah, I think one practical issue as well is responding to individual commenters with anything other than points of hard fact is a bad idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so real world example that none of us are involved in, so we can talk about it because none of us are under NDA. XCOM. They got a massive amount of feedback. I do know some of the devs on XCOM. You know, I think there's no doubt that the team is capable, and that whatever the final product is going to be, you know, of a certain level of quality. But I mean, speaking as someone who, when it first came out, I believe Rock Paper Shotgun picked up my quote of saying, "For fuck's sake, stop raping my childhood first."
Yeah.
I can't remember. I complained about one game first that had been remade and ruined, and then referenced XCOM. And as I say, I do actually have a friend working on it. But now they got a whole raft of feedback, and it's been clear through their dev diaries and stuff they have been trying to address it. And it's not feedback necessarily on the game, it's purely style and overall direction feedback. How much do you think a dev should be responding to that kind of feedback?
I think especially if it's in like the early pre-production stages, you gotta walk a tightrope. Because, you know, this is your fan base. These are the people who will potentially buy your game. If right off the bat you're receiving a bunch of negative feedback for whatever reason, you know, you got to walk a real careful balancing act where, you know, give them what they want, but at the same time without compromising, you know, your vision and what you want to do, because that's the people that are going to make or break your game.
And it strikes me that in the case of XCOM in particular, there was a fairly simple solution, which was to not call it XCOM. You know, I mean, they could have said it's set in the XCOM universe, they could have said all kinds of things, but just invoking the name, it brings on all these fans who have expectations. And this is the really dangerous thing, I think. When you're going to put something out to a group who have expectations already, you're going to get you're going to get feedback that's just along the lines of, this doesn't match what we expected. And that may or may not be useful. If you're trying to give them what they're expecting and they're telling you it doesn't match that, then, you know, that's fair enough. That's useful information because you're not achieving what you set out to do. But if you're just trying to make a game and then you field it in such a way that it's going to fall foul of all these expectations, a lot of that feedback just isn't relevant to what you were trying to do.
But I suppose the question comes up about who owns the IP, so to speak. I mean, obviously legally we know who owns the IP, but how much of the fan ownership matters? Because if you take some things like take the conversion from Duke 2 to Duke 3D, that was a massive gear shift for the product, and the thing we will always remember is Duke 3D. Likewise, I'm trying to think of other radical reworks where the rework's been more successful than the original. But you know, I mean, it's how much as devs are you bespoke to the players? How much should you be paying attention to this, and how do you handle how do you handle a large player base like in XCOM's case, where there's got, and I don't mean to rat on them, I'm using them as the clear example, but this happens to many projects, where a passionate fan base, who possibly, more than likely not even played your game, have got an opinion and are strongly, expressing that opinion. How do you approach that? Or if you've just launched an MMO, how do you gear shift or?
I think one of the big reasons why the XCOM fan base responded the way they did was partly because a lot of them are fans of the XCOM series because of the turn-based tactical stuff, and they really want more of those games, and there aren't very many of those coming out. So they hear that there's a new XCOM game, they're thinking, hey, great, it's going to be a new tactical turn-based thing, and then discover that it isn't. And that's what frustrates them. Now, it strikes me that the best way to resolve their complaints is to make a second game as well. Sell them both games. Sell them the game that's being made at the moment on the XCOM game, and also someone somewhere should really greenlight a turn-based tactical one, because clearly there are the players for it.
Are there? Because, this comes up again with player feedback. I don't want to share any numbers, but generally forum users make up... I suppose I can safely throw these numbers around. Generally forum users make up between less than 1% to possibly 3-4% of your active user base. And of those forum users, your post count is going to be made up of majority 10% of the percentage who visit the forums. So your forum users are a very small, passionate core. Likewise, the amount of people who read your website material or your press releases is relatively small in comparison to your greater fan base. So it's how do you do this? In social games now we talk a lot about business intelligence and using analytics and actually pulling data raw from the game, but that data is without context and it's very emotionless. So how do you deal with these? How do you deal with these fans? And as a developer, when you see something you've put so much love into torn to shreds, possibly correctly, possibly without grounding, how do you move forward positively?
I guess this is one of the things we have to be consistent when we're talking about the fans giving us feedback then, because as you say, the people posting on the forums often are only a tiny percentage of the fan base. So maybe everyone on the forum is saying X, but that doesn't necessarily, that doesn't translate to the fan base says X. It just, it can be the local minority. So we should just be clear exactly what we're talking about with that, and that possibly that the people on the forums might not like it, but perhaps 99% of other players do. And in that case, how would we respond to it differently if we knew that to be true?
Okay.
It's smart to say, look at your sales numbers. You're still selling. If people are complaining, then let them complain, I suppose.
And there are other metrics as well, like the number of people who are still playing online and all kinds of things.
Okay.
Build a feedback system inside the game itself.
I've seen some games starting to use things like Google Analytics to just track exactly what players are doing in the game as well. Find out which play modes they use on a frequent basis. Find out which maps.
I was thinking.
I think it's a very, very, very good idea. Get actual feedback on what players are doing rather than just on what they bother to tell you about.
Without having to sit there and watch them play. Yeah.
Okay, to reroute slightly, because we've got two students with us, if you are a student or possibly in a limited development environment where you won't have these players commenting on your work, how do we suggest that students get the best amount of feedback on the work? Because I think it's a given that they should get the feedback, and that they should learn to deal with this harsh feedback, as we said in the interview process. But how does a student best go about getting feedback on their work?
Put it out there and let people play, I guess.
Yeah, like the games program here at Bradley, it's only a full year old. This is the second year that it's been offered. So, for us, there's a lot of experimenting, but the professor in charge, throughout the whole course of the projects, she's been having us do testing week after week with, she'll have us put together, a dedicated, testing user base. So in the case of the last game I worked on, it was a 4th or 5th grade class at one of the local high schools. because that was the demographic our game was geared towards. So every time we'd hit a major milestone, alpha, beta, pre-release, all that, we'd go test the game with the kids, try and get feedback, and and then we had to play that tightrope act of, okay, well, what do we include, and which ideas of theirs are realistic, which are just way beyond our league, and that was how we went about it here, was just trying to do actual physical testing, sitting face to face across from these people, and then trying to figure it out from there.
That sounds really amazing. Who's your course leader, by the way?
Dr. Monica McGill.
Okay. I don't know if anyone's familiar with. Okay.
That's some really good feedback, because kids are pretty honest.
Yeah. Well, one of the problems we ran into with testing such a young user base was they don't know how to offer constructive criticism, not like adults do. So, they were
unfiltered, that's all.
Yeah, like they were afraid to say anything negative, and like a lot of their comments structured more around, well, I think you should add this, 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 and this, because these would be awesome. It's like, okay, well, we agree with those on some level, but we've got 3 months to do this, and so there's that.
How is this different than most forum posts?
Yeah. So, and they were having a hard time of understanding the concept of criticism, and it was more geared towards like, oh, it's awesome, and these you should add this stuff to make it even more awesome.
As Colin says, though, that is the feedback we get from people on our forums. Speaking as someone who has a game in closed beta at the moment, the majority of feedback we get isn't this game sucks. It's here's how you should improve it, or here's a feature idea, and often it's really well thought out, well written, really solid stuff. But as you say, you've got scope. So, how do you get feedback, Colin?
My experience, I did some online community type style games, and a lot of times in forums, or just actually, I did it in a virtual world, a lot of the games. So you could actually walk up to the people and talk to them and find out what they were doing, and even watch them play what they're doing. That was always some good feedback. But also, yes, you get the people that would complain. Most of the time it was positive feedback and good constructive stuff. So, but obviously in every platform it's not as simple to do that. Just walk up to them and talk to them.
So
that's about the limit unfortunately, of my feedback experience. But.
So have either of you in academia been exposed to usability testing or any kind of formal processes?
Yeah, well, the system we use here at Bradley, it's actually based around, your kind of standard usability testing where you're trying to get both qualitative and quantitative data. And, and because, the games program here at Bradley is so new, a lot of it is still just experimenting as the most efficient and best ways to go about it.
I don't know, Rich. How much do you think the students or indies should be incorporating usability software into their projects? Things like heat maps or click flow or things like that.
I think, on one level, I think those things are just really kind of cool. Anyway, it's really neat to be able to look at a heat map where everyone dies on your level. It's just a cool thing. And indies love putting cool things in their games, so they should be doing that anyway. There are some really elaborate things you can go to. You can, have people sat down in labs with eye tracking and measuring their pulse and so on, and all that stuff. I think that's probably, way overkill for what most of these need. I think the key thing that a lot of people don't get right when they're trying to get feedback and usability and so on is they need to go in asking the right questions. It's not enough to just have someone play the game and watch and ask what they think. You need to be looking to test particular things like, are the controls easy enough to understand? Is it clear enough, when the tutorial says this thing, it goes that way or this way, is it clear enough what you're supposed to do at this time? That I think is the real key to good, productive usability testing, is really having something to test. Not just the game, but having particular ideas about how the game should be. Because otherwise, the feedback is an answer to a question that no one's asked, and it's often too vague to be very useful. As a game designer, you're going to know broadly what the areas of contention of the game are going to be. You know which sort of things may or may not need changing. You'll also know, because you'll be familiar with the project, which things you've got the budget and the resources to change as well. It's going to be no good asking players about the set of weapons in the game if you don't have any time left to add or remove any weapons, kind of thing. I think that's probably the key thing that the indies can do, is just to make sure that they're paying attention to what it is they want to know about their game when they go out and asking it. And having said that, there are a few practical mechanisms that can be kind of handy. Being able to actually file feedback from within the game itself, that's a pretty powerful thing that I've only ever seen done in studios as bug reporting. But being able to basically tap a key that brings up a little console where you fill in, a description of the bug, and it takes a screenshot and it records like the play session at that point, so it attaches it all, sends it all in as one bundle. Start shipping that actually in your game as well.
That's a very good point. I don't know if anyone on AltDevBlog has written about it, but mini dumps.
Yeah.
Has anyone done an article about mini dumps?
Don't think so.
Because mini dumps, for those of you unaware, no, I'm not seeing an article. Mini dumps, for those of you who aren't aware, basically is it takes a stack, but it doesn't take the heap, if I'm correct, right?
That's right.
Yeah, it takes a stack, but it doesn't take the heap. So you get a full call stack, and it gets the variables on the call stack, and it basically saves that out, and then Windows offers a system that lets you basically create a mini dump, show the standard Windows error box, and then with a bit of jiggery pokery, you can basically automate the sending off and emailing off of that.
Oh yeah.
And
this is another thing that so many people just don't do. The standard, like Windows, this application has crashed, would you like to report it? You can register with Microsoft. I think it might even be free to log in and download all the reports from your application that people have submitted. I think you have to sign the application first, but that's £100 for a code signing certificate.
yeah.
And that's a very powerful thing that people just tend to completely overlook.
Yeah, no, I mean, because this getting data from your users is such a big point. I'm really sad we had Paul pop in and out there, but the one company that gets this so right is Microsoft. If you've ever got a usability test report from Microsoft Labs, it's like it's just such gold. They do really, really good work there. Though Paul isn't there anymore, I believe. Because he's now stateside. But yeah, the usability reports there. I mean, the first full usability report I ever got was from Microsoft, and it was stuff I would have never considered. Like the one question that I always remember that stuck out is they had a fairly large testing group, and one of the questions and one of the answers was, you have 5 minutes, locate the help menu. 1 out of 10 of the participants in our demographic could not locate the help menu. And it was one menu item deep. It was under settings and options. And it was like such a mistake, and we fixed it immediately, and it was so easy to fix. But that's the kind of thing that you would never actually think to because especially if you've got gamers and stuff, if you've not got a proper usability testing where you're actually thrown it at your demographic, whether that's kids or families or whatever, those are the kind of things that you just don't see.
Yeah.
As I say, it's easy to overlook things when you know where everything is.
Absolutely.
Okay, does anyone have anything else to say on usability or getting feedback from players? Any core tips?
I'll just repeat something I heard from Eric Wolpart at Valve a couple of years back. A couple I know because it was after Portal came out. he gave a talk at GDC along with Kim Swift, and they were talking about the now famous Valve process of having completely fresh playtesters every week kind of thing. And he was just talking about how it impacted him as a comedy writer. And he was finding, because he was listening to the same jokes and the same bit of script over and over throughout the course of the project, he was convincing himself it was no longer funny. And by having fresh playtesters in every week who would laugh at the jokes that they had not heard before every week and so on, he was able to convince himself and just stay sane that it was actually still funny. And this is something that I think does happen on a lot of teams, just in general. Like, the game gets harder and harder as development progresses, because the developers get so good at playing it themselves that they start thinking it's too easy, start balancing it to be harder, and then eventually it's given to the poor players who are like, oh god, what? Ah! And it's only through having a regular kind of sort of reality check, giving it to fresh eyes, fresh thumbs every now and again, that you can make sure that things are actually still in balance. Otherwise, yeah, you do just start losing track of things because you know where everything is already, and you stop. You don't need to bother looking at where the help menu is and so on.
Okay, that's awesome. One other topic that just springs to mind that seen as we have you here, Colin, is something that it's somewhat of a pet peeve of mine, and I'd like to just hear thoughts on it. Is audio levels. Speaking of balancing in games. Because so often in a dev studio, either everyone has the sound off or they're listening to their own music. And there's the just general audio balance throughout the game between environmental effects, especially if your content offers some level of, like your level editor or whatever, offers some level of control to the level designer to basically screw up levels. And balance levels. What are your thoughts on this, guys? Or is this me picking up a non-issue?
I guess that's more of a personal thing. I think giving somebody control definitely helps with that. If you can't turn down all your sounds, or the thing that always annoys me the most is when the music is blaring in your ear sometimes. I want to hear more environmental sound effects to bring myself into a game where I don't want the music overpowering it or sound effects for that matter. So yeah, I think having control of that for a player is important.
Yeah, that solves the greater scale, but I'm talking more about the granularity of individual effects. Or is this, as I say, am I nitpicking on an issue that doesn't exist? Is it just something that I notice?
Well, I think if an individual effect isn't set right, it probably throws it out of the realisticness of it. If it's not mixed in right, or if it's too loud, then yeah. I guess maybe I don't understand the question or what you're nitpicking on it about.
So often a certain sound of the game, it's interesting that you say realistic there, because, for instance, gun sounds, if you've ever fired a gun's freaking deafening. However, in games, we tend to bring it a lot more down because it's not about the realism. But so often you'll open a door, or you'll have, I think the classic one that always used to bug me in old shooters was when they used that standard sound for walking on steel.
Oh, yeah.
And they hadn't normalized all their sounds correctly, and that just sort of drowned everything out. And yes, walking on steel is really loud.
Sounds eventually get a little annoying too.
Yeah, I think when the levels are too high as well, it can really bring home how repetitive some of the sounds are. There's a problem I ran into fairly recently. We've got we have bullet cases flying out of the weapons in our game, and they land on the sound, and there's a little ting noise. And initially, we had one ting sound. We weren't varying pitch or volume at all, but it was just too loud. So you start firing, and you hear the sequence of ting 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 ting, and it gets horrendously irritating.
Or even if it's the same sound just used over and over, like you said, if you're not varying the pitch, you're not varying the levels.
Even when we did introduce a little bit of variance in the volume and the pitch, it was still incredibly irritating. And just bringing the levels right down, so it's just like, I think we only play every third bullet now as well. So we decrease the frequency and decrease the volume a long way. So if anything else in the game is happening at all, you probably won't hear the sound.
Yeah.
But if nothing else is happening and you hear it, then it's okay. But when the levels were higher, yeah, it was totally. But yeah, it was this irritating, high pitched, loud, repetitive sound.
Yeah. Okay, so it sounds like I'm the only person who really gets totally thrown by this.
Well, I mean, I suspect that with something like Levels, it's one of these things where it's not very easy. It's not like there's one way to get it perfectly right, and players won't really care if it's right. They'll only care if it's noticeably wrong.
Yes.
That's what most sense.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is the thing, is just make sure that, provided none of the sounds are noticeably wrong, then there is no particular right way to do it beyond that. As long as you have them all roughly in the right place, then it should go okay.
Okay. Anything anyone wants to bring up, or do we feel like we've talked ourselves out?
I'm sure we could talk all night, but...
Well, some of us do have work in the morning.
Yeah. I feel like this was pretty good. I don't know. It'd be nice to get some other people's viewpoints on it. Not to say I didn't like Richard's, because I think you had a lot of good stuff to say, but I didn't want to make you talk the whole time. But you had a lot of good feedback, though.
Cool. I mean, I feel like we haven't really been able to involve Colin and Rob as much as I would like.
Comes with not being too much into the industry and only having like a very narrow view and viewpoint.
I can tell you my opinions.
That's all I mean.
It'll turn into forum posts.
I've been making everything up as I go along anyway.
Oh, beautiful. Well, you're doing a good job at it.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll run a very, very quick pass on edit on this, and then see if I can get it up before I go to bed. And but thank you guys for partaking in this first experiment. As I say, it is an experiment. It's very rough. Hopefully we'll be able to get the Google on-air functionality working, and hopefully we'll try this again, because I feel like it sort of worked. We'll just see the feedback from the actual video.
Yeah, it'd be great. Yeah, I'd love to participate again.
Okay, well...
You know, I'll have more to say next time. Now I know what to expect.
Yes, I think possibly a list. I think Rich suggested this earlier. Even if you don't have a set agenda, if you have a list of possible agenda items,
Yeah.
It's a cool we can draw from that people can throw stuff into whenever, kind of thing.
Yeah, because I was just having to pick stuff out of the air there.
It's okay. It was a learning experience.
It was a learning experience. Well, thank you guys for all 3,212 seconds.
Hey.
Hey.